In this thrilling story, a corrupt cop steals a luxury car from a successful black woman, only to find himself begging for mercy just moments later. What could possibly drive this sudden twist of fate? As the tension escalates, secrets are revealed, and a fight for justice unfolds. Will the tables turn for good, or is there more danger ahead for both of them? Dive into this suspense-filled tale to discover the truth behind the officer's desperate plea. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and reviews in the comments. Your feedback means everything. Jason Turner sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, the lights off, staring into the night. His hand rested on the steering wheel, tapping slowly, as if his fingers were keeping time with his thoughts. It was quiet, too quiet. The late-night streets of the city, normally bustling with activity, were now hushed under the weight of the hour. The darkness hung in the air, broken only by the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Jason thrived in this quiet. It allowed him to think, to plan, and sometimes to act. Jason wasn't like other cops. At least that's what he told himself every day when he put on the uniform. While others took their oath to protect and serve seriously, Jason saw the badge as a shield, a tool for his own gain. Over the years, he learned how to manipulate situations, turn a blind eye when it suited him, and use his authority to make his life easier. The job wasn't about justice, it was about power, and Jason knew how to wield power. Tonight, the city felt ripe with opportunity. Jason's eyes scanned the streets, looking for something, someone, who might cross his path. His patrol shifts were often quiet, but every now and then, a situation presented itself, and Jason was always ready to seize it. His colleagues didn't know the real Jason Turner, the one who thrived in bending the rules when no one was watching. They only saw the calm, controlled officer who did his job without question. Jason's phone buzzed on the dashboard, a message from one of his usual informants. "West Side, flashy car, woman alone." He grinned. This could be something worth his time. Jason started the engine, the hum of the patrol car breaking the silence. He pulled out onto the road, heading in the direction of the tip. As he drove, the city lights became a blur, and his thoughts focused on what might lie ahead. In his mind, Jason was invincible. He had a badge, a gun, and a sense of entitlement that made him believe he could do no wrong. 10 minutes later, he spotted the car, a sleek, black luxury sedan parked under a streetlight. The shine of the vehicle's exterior caught his eye immediately. It was a car that screamed wealth, something that didn't belong in this part of town. And beside the car, standing with a phone in her hand, was a woman. Her posture was confident, her head held high as she tapped away on her screen. Jason's predatory instincts kicked in. He slowed the patrol car as he approached, his eyes narrowing as he took in the woman's appearance. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored outfit that only added to the air of success she carried with her. A black woman, alone in a neighborhood like this, with a car like that? Jason couldn't resist. He pulled over, turning on his lights for show, though his actions had nothing to do with duty. Stepping out of the car, he adjusted his belt, making sure his gun was visible. Authority was as much about image as it was about force. "Evening, ma'am," Jason said, his voice carrying a veneer of politeness that he'd perfected over the years. "Everything all right here?" The woman glanced up from her phone, her gaze steady and unflinching. She didn't look afraid or intimidated, and that irked Jason more than it should have. "I'm fine, officer, just waiting for a friend," she replied, her tone calm, almost dismissive. Jason's eyes flicked over the car again, taking in the expensive rims, the pristine condition of the paintwork. He wasn't an expert on cars, but even he could tell this one cost more than most people made in a year. He felt a spark of envy deep in his gut. "That's a nice car," Jason said, his tone shifting slightly. "Mind if I see your license and registration?" The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly questioning the need for such a request. "Is there a problem, officer?" Jason's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a routine check. You know how it is. Got to make sure everything's in order." She hesitated for a moment before sighing softly and reaching into her purse. "All right," she said, handing over her license and registration. "But I'm not sure what this is really about." Naomi Davis leaned against her luxury sedan, staring at the glow of her phone screen, but her mind was miles away. The encounter with Officer Jason Turner had left a bitter taste in her mouth, a gnawing sense of unease she couldn't quite shake. She had dealt with men like him before, people who believed their uniform or status gave them the right to question her place in the world, to challenge her success. She straightened her back, letting out a breath. Naomi had worked too hard for too long to let anyone intimidate her. This car, this life she had built for herself, it was a testament to her determination, resilience, and grit. Coming from humble beginnings, Naomi had faced obstacles at every turn, but she had risen above them all. She was now a successful entrepreneur, running her own online business that catered to high-end clients. It had taken years of long hours, late nights, and sacrifices, but it was all worth it. She wasn't about to let a corrupt cop like Jason Turner tarnish that. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her brother, Jonathan. "Jonathan, where are you? Everything all right?" Naomi smiled slightly at the message. Jonathan had always been protective of her, ever since they were kids. He was only 2 years older, but he took his role as her big brother seriously, especially after their parents passed away when they were both teenagers. Jonathan had become her rock, supporting her through every challenge, even when it meant sacrificing his own dreams. "Naomi, I'm fine. Just had a weird run-in with a cop. I'll tell you about it later." She hit send, knowing Jonathan would be worried, but she didn't want to get into it over text. He was a lawyer, always looking for a fight when it came to injustice, and she knew he'd want to do something about this situation. But Naomi wasn't ready for that. Not yet. She glanced up at the street, noticing the patrol car still circling the block. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. Something about Officer Turner felt off. The way he had looked at her, the thinly veiled disdain in his voice. It wasn't just a routine stop. He had been looking for something, and Naomi had a sinking feeling that he hadn't gotten what he wanted yet. The car disappeared around the corner again, and Naomi took a deep breath. She needed to get out of here. Her friend Sandra was supposed to meet her here for a late dinner, but after what had just happened, Naomi didn't feel like hanging around this part of town any longer. She sent Sandra a quick message, telling her she'd meet her at the restaurant instead. Sliding into the driver's seat, Naomi felt a familiar comfort in the plush leather interior. The car was more than just a symbol of her success. It was a reminder of how far she'd come, from scraping by to being able to afford something this luxurious. She gripped the steering wheel, feeling a wave of gratitude mixed with pride. No one could take this from her. No one. The engine purred to life as she pulled away from the curb, her eyes checking the rearview mirror for any sign of the patrol car. For a few blocks, it seemed like she was in the clear, but just as she relaxed her shoulders, there he was again. The flashing lights of Officer Turner's car appeared behind her, trailing her like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. "Seriously?" Naomi muttered under her breath. Her heart raced as she considered her options. She could pull over, confront him, but something told her that wouldn't end well. Jason Turner wasn't just another cop on a power trip. He was dangerous, and Naomi knew it. She didn't want to provoke him any further. She kept driving, her mind racing through possible scenarios. Should she call Jonathan? Maybe, but she didn't want to escalate the situation. Maybe it was better to get somewhere more public, somewhere safe. She tapped the address of the restaurant into her GPS, glancing at the directions on the screen. It was only 10 minutes away. She could make it there. But then the patrol car sped up, pulling alongside her. Naomi's grip on the steering wheel tightened as she looked over. Jason Turner was staring at her through the passenger window, his eyes cold and calculating. He motioned for her to pull over, but she didn't move. She wasn't about to be intimidated, not by him. He sped up, swerving his car in front of hers, forcing her to slow down. Naomi's pulse quickened. This wasn't right. She tapped her phone, her thumb hovering over Jonathan's contact. But before she could press it, Jason's car screeched to a halt, blocking the road in front of her. Naomi's car rolled to a stop behind him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no choice now. She had to confront him. She took a deep breath, calming her nerves, and reached for the door handle. But as she stepped out, Jason was already walking toward her, his hand resting on his belt in a way that made her feel uneasy. Ms. Davis, Jason said, his voice unnervingly calm, I thought I'd give you another chance to show me some respect. Naomi raised an eyebrow, her stomach churning with a mix of fear and anger. Respect? I don't owe you anything, officer. Jason's smile was slow and dangerous. Oh, but you do. You see, people like you need to learn your place, and I'm the one who's going to teach you. Before Naomi could respond, Jason stepped closer, his hand brushing against the side of her car. Nice ride, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But you know, cars like this don't really belong to people like you. How about we make a trade? Naomi's blood ran cold. Was he serious? He was threatening to take her car, right in front of her. Her instinct screamed at her to fight back, but she knew that would only make things worse. She had to think, to stay calm. Officer, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't right, Naomi said, keeping her voice steady. Jason's smile didn't waver. Right? That's a funny word coming from someone like you. You think because you've got money, you're above the law? Naomi clenched her fists at her sides, trying to maintain control. I've done nothing wrong. Jason stepped even closer, his face inches from hers now. That's where you're wrong, Ms. Davis. You see, you made the mistake of thinking you could walk away from me. But I always get what I want. And with that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a key fob. Naomi's eyes widened as he pressed the button, and her car's lights flashed. He had her keys. How? Naomi's voice caught in her throat as Jason twirled the keys in his hand, a smug grin spreading across his face. I'll be taking this now, Jason said, stepping around her and opening the driver's side door. Consider it a lesson. Naomi's mind raced. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let him take her car, her hard-earned success, just because he felt like it. But she was out of options. Her phone was in the car, and Jason was blocking her path. Don't do this, Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason slid into the driver's seat, closing the door behind him. He looked at her through the window, his smile widening as he started the engine. Too late. The car roared to life, and in an instant, Jason was gone, speeding down the street, leaving Naomi standing there, stunned and powerless. For a moment, she stood frozen, disbelief washing over her. How had this happened? How had a man like him, with a badge and a uniform, just taken everything from her in a matter of minutes? But then something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. Naomi took off running down the street, her legs pumping as adrenaline surged through her veins. She had no plan, no idea how she was going to stop him, but she couldn't stand by and do nothing. Naomi sprinted down the dark street, her shoes hitting the pavement hard, each step echoing the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The luxury sedan, her pride and joy, was nothing but red taillights in the distance, disappearing rapidly as Officer Jason Turner sped away. The sound of the engine growled, fading into the night, leaving her standing alone in disbelief. For a few moments, her breath came in shallow gasps, her mind racing to process what had just happened. Jason Turner, a man who was supposed to protect and serve, had stolen her car. Stolen it right in front of her eyes. The sheer audacity of his actions, the smugness in his voice, it all felt surreal. But this wasn't a dream. It was real, and Jason was getting away with it. Naomi stopped running, her hands on her knees as she struggled to catch her breath. There was no point in chasing him now. He was long gone, and she had no way to catch up. Desperation clung to her, but beneath it all, there was a growing anger, a fire that she couldn't control. How dare he? How dare he think he could just take what was hers? Her phone. It was still in the car. She cursed under her breath. She needed help, and fast. Naomi glanced around, scanning the quiet, dimly lit street. There were no other cars, no pedestrians, and no open businesses. It was just her, standing alone under the flickering light of a street lamp. She straightened, squaring her shoulders, determination setting in. This wasn't over. She wouldn't let it be over. Jason Turner had picked the wrong woman to mess with. Naomi quickly assessed her situation. No phone, no car. But she still had her wits. She had friends. And most importantly, she had her brother Jonathan, the one person who would stop at nothing to ensure justice was served. Without wasting another second, Naomi began walking briskly toward the nearest intersection, hoping she'd find an open convenience store or at least someone with a phone. As she walked, her mind reeled, replaying the events of the past hour. The cold smile on Jason's face, the way he twirled her keys as if they were his prize. He had done this before. She could see it in his eyes. He was too comfortable, too confident in his ability to get away with it. And maybe up until now he had, but not this time. After what felt like an eternity, Naomi spotted a small corner shop still illuminated, its neon sign flickering in and out. She quickened her pace, rushing toward it, relief flooding her as she pushed the door open. Inside, the smell of cheap coffee and cleaning products hit her, and the cashier, a young man in his early 20s, barely looked up from his phone as she entered. Naomi hurried to the counter, her heart still pounding. "Excuse me," she said, trying to keep her voice calm but urgent. "I need to use a phone. It's an emergency." The cashier glanced up, his expression lazy and indifferent. "Phones for customers only," he muttered, his eyes dropping back to his screen. Naomi felt a flash of frustration. "I'll buy something. Just let me use the phone." He sighed, clearly annoyed at the disruption. "Fine, whatever. Phone's over there." Naomi followed his nod toward a grimy-looking payphone in the back corner of the store. She hadn't used a payphone in years, but it didn't matter. She needed to call Jonathan. She fumbled in her pockets, pulling out a crumpled bill and some loose change, just enough to make a call. With trembling fingers, Naomi punched in Jonathan's number, praying he'd pick up. The phone rang once, twice, then his familiar voice came on the line. "Hello? Jonathan," Naomi gasped, relief washing over her. "It's me." "Naomi? What's going on? Are you all right?" Jonathan's voice instantly sharpened, concern cutting through the static. "No, I'm not," Naomi said, her voice cracking as she fought to keep her composure. "Jason Turner, he stole my car." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Jonathan's voice came back, low and dangerous. "What do you mean he stole your car?" "He pulled me over, started harassing me, and then he took it. He drove off with it like it was nothing. I tried to stop him, but—" "Jonathan, I don't know what to do." "Where are you now?" Jonathan asked, his voice calm but laced with barely controlled anger. "I'm at a convenience store a few blocks away from where it happened. I didn't have my phone. He drove off with it still in the car." "Stay there," Jonathan said firmly. "I'm coming to get you, and then we're going to handle this." Naomi hung up the phone, her hands still shaking. Jonathan would know what to do. He always did. He had been a lawyer for years, fighting for justice, particularly for those who had been wronged by people in power. If anyone could help her, it was him. As she waited for Jonathan to arrive, Naomi paced the small aisle of the store, her mind racing with questions. How had Jason Turner gotten away with this for so long? How many other people had he intimidated, bullied, stolen from? The thought sickened her. She wasn't going to be just another one of his victims. 10 minutes later, headlights flooded the front of the store, and Naomi looked up to see Jonathan's car pulling up. She rushed outside, meeting him as he stepped out of the car. Jonathan was tall and broad-shouldered, his face set in a grim expression. "Naomi," he said, pulling her into a quick hug. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. I can't believe this is happening." "Believe it," Jonathan said, his jaw clenched. "Jason Turner is a known bully in his precinct. I've heard stories about him, but nothing this blatant. He's never crossed someone like you before, though." "What do we do now?" Naomi asked, her hands still trembling slightly as the reality of the situation fully sank in. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his mind already working. "We report this immediately. I've got contacts at the precinct, people who aren't corrupt like Turner. But we'll need to act fast. He'll try to cover this up if we give him the chance." Naomi nodded. She trusted Jonathan. He had a way of cutting through the noise, getting to the truth, and holding people accountable. But as they climbed into his car and drove toward the police station, a new thought crept into her mind. What if it wasn't just Jason Turner? What if the corruption went deeper? How far did this go? As they approached the station, Jonathan glanced over at her. "You ready for this?" Naomi took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready. Let's make sure he doesn't get away with this." They walked into the police station together, Jonathan leading the way. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a harsh glow over the dingy waiting area. An officer behind the desk glanced up, raising an eyebrow as Jonathan approached. "I need to speak to Detective Marcus King," Jonathan said, his voice steady. The officer eyed them both for a moment before picking up the phone. After a brief exchange, he motioned for them to sit. "He'll be out in a minute." Naomi's heart pounded as they waited. She had heard of Marcus King before. Jonathan had mentioned him in passing, a detective who didn't play by the same rules as the corrupt officers around him. If anyone could help them, it was him. A few minutes later, a tall, stern-looking man in his early 40s stepped out from the back. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on Jonathan. "Jonathan," he said, offering a brief nod before turning to Naomi. "Ms. Davis, I'm Detective Marcus King. I hear we've got a problem." "That's putting it lightly," Jonathan said, his voice tight. "Jason Turner stole my sister's car tonight. We need to make sure he pays for it." Marcus's expression hardened. "Turner, huh? That doesn't surprise me. He's been skating by for years. But this is bold, even for him." "We can't let him get away with it," Naomi said, her voice firm. "I want to press charges. Whatever it takes." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "We'll take care of it. But you should know, it's not just Turner. There's a lot more going on in that precinct than you might think." Naomi exchanged a glance with Jonathan, her suspicions confirmed. This was bigger than one corrupt cop, and now she was in the middle of it. "We're ready for whatever comes next," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "Turner made a mistake tonight, and we're going to make sure he regrets it." This chapter raises the stakes further, introducing Jonathan and Detective Marcus King, setting the stage for a deeper investigation into the corruption surrounding Officer Turner. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. Banjan Noi, Viet Tiep Chuang Bon Fan Mot Jodai Mot Hin, Nam Trum to Chat GPT Janoi. Chat GPT, here's Chapter 4 of Part 1, continuing the story with 1,500 words, approximately 1,500 words. Chapter 4, The Aftermath of the Theft. Naomi sat across from Detective Marcus King in a small, dimly lit interrogation room at the police station. The hum of the overhead light was the only sound as Marcus tapped a pen against his notepad. He had been silent for several minutes, letting the weight of the situation sink in. Naomi, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap, tried to keep her focus. Jonathan sat beside her, his presence a constant reminder that she wasn't in this alone. Marcus finally leaned forward, breaking the silence. "Naomi, I want to be clear about something. Jason Turner isn't just some rogue officer. What happened to you tonight is part of a much larger issue. There are people inside this precinct who've been protecting him for years." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it from Marcus, someone inside the system, made it all too real. "What kind of protection?" Jonathan asked, his voice steady but with an edge of controlled anger. "Are we talking about a few officers, or is this corruption systemic?" Marcus sighed, setting his pen down. "It's not just a few bad apples. Turner's been allowed to operate the way he does because people higher up are turning a blind eye. They cover for him, bury complaints, and make sure any evidence against him disappears before it can go to court." Naomi felt a flash of anger rise in her chest. How is that possible? How can someone like him keep getting away with it? "Because," Marcus said, his voice low, "the people who are supposed to hold him accountable are in on it. It's not just about money or power. It's about control. Turner and the others like him keep things running smoothly for the people at the top. They use intimidation, force, and fear to maintain their grip on this city." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "And you're saying this precinct is involved? What's your role in all of this?" Marcus met Jonathan's gaze without flinching. "I've been trying to take Turner down for years. I've filed reports, collected evidence, but every time I get close, it all disappears. Someone pulls the plug before it can go anywhere. But tonight, we might have something they can't ignore. Turner went too far. If we play this right, we can take him down. And the people protecting him?" Naomi's mind raced. She had come here to get her car back, to make sure Turner faced consequences, but now it seemed like the stakes were much higher than she had realized. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about taking down an entire corrupt network, one that had been operating for years, unchecked. What's the next step? Naomi asked, her voice calm despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. Marcus glanced at Jonathan, then back at Naomi. We need to make this official. I'll start by filing the report against Turner. We'll document everything, his harassment, the theft of your car, and the threats he made. But we need more than just your statement. We need hard evidence. Naomi nodded. What kind of evidence? Anything that links him directly to the theft and the corruption, Marcus said. Security footage, witness statements, anything we can get our hands on. And we need to act fast before his people can cover it up. Jonathan leaned forward. I know a few people in the legal community who might be able to help. I can start making calls, see if anyone's willing to go on record about Turner's past behavior. Marcus nodded. That's a good start. We also need to get a handle on Turner's movements. He's not going to lay low after tonight. He's going to try and cover his tracks. I'll pull what I can from the station's resources, but I'll need your help, Naomi. Naomi blinked, surprised. My help? What do you mean? Marcus leaned closer, his expression serious. Turner targeted you because he thought he could intimidate you into silence. He's counting on you being too afraid to fight back. But if you're willing to stand up to him, if you're willing to go public with this, then we can put pressure on him and his allies. We can make this bigger than just one stolen car. Naomi felt her pulse quicken. Going public meant putting herself in the spotlight, making herself a target. It meant opening up her life to scrutiny, risking everything she had worked for. But it also meant standing up for herself, for her community, and for everyone else Turner had wronged. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide right now, he said softly. But if we're going to take this all the way, you need to be ready for what comes next. Naomi took a deep breath, her mind racing through the possibilities. Could she do it? Could she risk everything to bring down Turner and the corruption surrounding him? Her car was important to her, but this was about more than that. This was about justice, about making sure that men like Jason Turner couldn't continue to abuse their power. I'll do it, Naomi said, her voice firm. I'm not going to let him win. Not this time. Marcus nodded, a look of approval crossing his face. Good. We'll need to move quickly. I'll start gathering the evidence we need, but I want you to stay alert. Turner's not going to take this lying down. Jonathan stood, pulling out his phone. I'll start making calls. I know a few people who've had run-ins with Turner in the past. If we can get them to come forward, it'll help build our case. As Jonathan stepped out of the room to make his calls, Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Naomi. You're making the right choice, he said quietly, but it's not going to be easy. Turner's protected, and the people backing him won't hesitate to come after you if they think you're a threat. Naomi nodded, her resolve solidifying. I know, but I'm not backing down. Marcus gave a small, approving smile. That's the attitude we need. Stay strong. This is just the beginning. Naomi sat back, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. She had never imagined her life would take such a dramatic turn, but now that she was here, there was no going back. Jason Turner had taken her car, but he had ignited something in her, a fire that wouldn't be easily extinguished. Jonathan returned a few minutes later, his expression serious. I've got a couple of people willing to talk, he said. One of them had his business raided by Turner a few months ago, and another was arrested under false pretenses. They're both willing to go on record. Good, Marcus said, standing up. That's what we need. I'll start putting together a case file. In the meantime, Naomi, I want you to be careful. Turner might not know yet that you're fighting back, but when he finds out, he won't be happy. Naomi stood as well, nodding. I'll be ready. They left the station together, stepping out into the cool night air. Naomi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. The fight against Jason Turner had only just begun, but she wasn't afraid. She was ready. As they walked toward Jonathan's car, Naomi glanced up at the stars twinkling in the sky, a sense of calm washing over her. She had spent her entire life fighting to prove herself, to rise above the challenges thrown her way. This was just another challenge, and she was determined to win. Jason Turner had underestimated her, and soon he would realize just how big of a mistake that was. Jason Turner gripped the steering wheel of Naomi's luxury sedan with a twisted sense of satisfaction as he sped through the city's empty streets. The night had fallen silent around him, the engine's purr the only sound cutting through the calm. He had done it. He'd taken what he wanted, like he always did. And once again, he was sure no one would do anything about it. After all, who would question him? A police officer with years of experience, someone who had long since learned how to bend the system to his will. The car glided over the pavement, its smooth handling a reminder of just how valuable it was. Jason had never owned anything like this. His life had been a series of compromises and shortcuts. And though he had built a comfortable existence through less than honest means, he always craved more. People like Naomi Davis, with their success, confidence, and wealth, were the ones he enjoyed taking down a peg. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the control, the power. She had looked at him like she was untouchable, like she was better than him. He hated that. But now, driving away with her prized possession, Jason felt an unfamiliar flicker of doubt in the pit of his stomach. He had pushed it further tonight than usual. Staring out at the road ahead, the city lights flickering in the distance, he allowed his thoughts to wander. Was it possible he had gone too far this time? Number. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. He'd done worse and never gotten caught. If Naomi went to the police, she'd be going up against a wall of silence and intimidation. He had connections, friends who would protect him. The system wasn't built to punish people like him. It was built to shield them. Jason had seen it happen time and time again. Yet there was something about the way she had looked at him when he'd taken the car. Her defiance had cut through him in a way that made him uneasy. Most people would be scared, broken down by the sheer audacity of his theft. But Naomi hadn't flinched. She had stood her ground, her eyes burning with a promise of revenge. That promise lingered in his mind as he drove. Jason made a sharp turn onto a side street, taking a deep breath to calm himself. He had to get rid of the car before anyone noticed. He couldn't drive around in it for long without drawing attention. He had a place in mind, an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town where no one would think to look. He'd leave it there for a few days, then figure out what to do next. Maybe strip it for parts or sell it to one of his contacts who dealt in stolen goods. As the city lights faded behind him, the industrial landscape came into view. Rows of factories and warehouses that had long since been abandoned. The perfect hiding spot. Jason's heart rate slowed as he pulled into the lot behind one of the buildings, parking the car in the shadows where it couldn't be easily spotted. He stepped out of the car, glancing around to make sure no one had followed him. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. He ran his hand over the sleek black paint of Naomi's car, the cool metal beneath his fingertips, a reminder of the thrill he got from taking what wasn't his. But as he stood there, staring at the car, something gnawed at him. A sense of guilt, foreign and unwelcome, crept into his chest. It wasn't something he usually felt. He had long since numbed himself to the moral consequences of his actions. But this was different. Maybe it was because Naomi hadn't reacted the way he'd expected. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, he had a feeling that he might actually have crossed the line. Jason shook his head again, trying to dispel the thought. He was being paranoid. Nothing would come of this. Naomi Davis was just another rich woman who thought the rules didn't apply to her. He'd taught her a lesson tonight, one she wouldn't soon forget. As he walked around to the driver's side, reaching in to grab the car's key fob, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He frowned, pulling it out. A text message from an unknown number. Unknown number. You messed up, Turner. We're watching. Jason's heart skipped a beat, his hand tightening around the phone. He looked around, scanning the darkened lot, his pulse quickening. Who could be watching? And how did they know what he'd done? He quickly typed a response, his fingers shaking slightly. Jason. "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Unknown number. You think no one's on to you? Think again. We know everything." Jason's throat tightened. He didn't scare easily, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just an empty threat. Someone knew about the car. Someone knew about him. His mind raced, going over the possibilities. Was it one of the guys from the station? Someone who'd been waiting for him to slip up? Or was it Naomi? Had she gone to someone outside the police department? Someone who wasn't bound by the same rules? The phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. You can't hide from this one, Turner." "It's too late." Jason swore under his breath, glancing at the car. He needed to get out of here now. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and hurried to the car's trunk, popping it open. He needed to wipe it down, make sure there were no traces left behind. His hands moved quickly, methodically, as he grabbed a rag from the trunk and began wiping down the door handles, the steering wheel, anything he might have touched. His mind was racing, trying to figure out who was after him and how much they knew. As he worked, the buzzing of his phone persisted, more messages coming in, each one more threatening than the last. But Jason ignored them. He didn't have time to deal with whoever was on the other end of that phone. He had to focus on covering his tracks. By the time he finished, his heart was pounding, his shirt sticking to his back with sweat. He stepped back from the car, giving it one last look before slamming the trunk shut. It was time to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. He'd figure out his next move later, once he had more information. Jason got back into the car and pulled away from the warehouse, his mind spinning. He couldn't help but feel like someone was watching him, like eyes were following his every move. His paranoia was getting the better of him, and he knew it, but he couldn't shake the feeling. As he drove, his phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text. It was a call. Jason glanced at the screen, recognizing the number. It was from the station, Sergeant Daniels. His heart raced as he pressed the answer button, keeping his voice calm. "Turner," Daniels' voice growled through the speaker, low and serious. "We need to talk, now." Jason swallowed hard. "About what?" "Don't play dumb, Turner. You know exactly what this is about. You're in deep and it's catching up to you. Meet me at the precinct, now." The call ended abruptly, leaving Jason with a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't just about the car anymore. Something bigger was coming. He could feel it, looming over him like a shadow. He had always believed he was untouchable, that his badge could protect him from any consequence. But now he wasn't so sure. As he sped down the darkened streets, Jason realized for the first time in years that he was no longer in control. And that terrified him. Naomi sat in the quiet of Jonathan's car, watching the city blur past her window as they drove away from the precinct. Her mind was racing. It was surreal how quickly everything had escalated. One moment she was dealing with a corrupt cop, and now she found herself tangled in something much bigger, an entire system of corruption that stretched beyond Jason Turner. But she wasn't going to let him get away with this, not after what he had done. Jonathan drove in silence beside her, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. Naomi could tell he was thinking through their next steps, already piecing together the legal strategy to take Turner down. She admired that about him, his ability to stay calm in the face of adversity, always planning his next move like a chess master. But for Naomi, the emotional weight of the night was starting to sink in. "Do you think Marcus can really help us?" Naomi asked, breaking the silence. Jonathan glanced over at her, his expression serious but confident. "If anyone can take down Turner and the corruption in that precinct, it's Marcus. He's got a reputation for doing things by the book, but he's not afraid to get his hands dirty when it comes to exposing the truth. We're lucky he's on our side." Naomi nodded, trying to hold on to that hope. "I just don't know how far this goes. Turner's not acting alone. I saw it in his eyes, he's protected. And if that's true, we could be up against more than just him." Jonathan's jaw clenched as he considered her words. "You're right. But that doesn't mean we back down. If we do, they win. Turner's been getting away with this kind of thing for too long. He's not going to expect you to fight back, Naomi. That's why we have the advantage. Naomi exhaled, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on her. I just want my life back. My car, my phone, everything he took from me. And you'll get it back, Jonathan said firmly. But this is about more than just the car. You've got a chance to expose him, to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. You're standing up for everyone he's wronged. Naomi looked out the window again, the city streets illuminated by the glow of streetlights. Jonathan was right, but the weight of that responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders. She had always been a fighter, but this was different. This was bigger than anything she had ever faced before. Jonathan parked the car and turned to her. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start gathering more evidence. I'll contact the people I know who've had run-ins with Turner, see if they're willing to come forward. We need as many voices as possible. Naomi nodded, grateful for Jonathan's support. Thanks for everything, John. I don't know what I'd do without you. Jonathan smiled, a rare expression of warmth crossing his usually serious face. You're my sister. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. We're going to get through this together. Naomi hugged him tightly, feeling the comfort of his embrace. Good night, she whispered before stepping out of the car and heading into her building. The elevator ride to her apartment felt unusually long. Each floor seemed to drag on, and Naomi found herself thinking back to the encounter with Turner. The fear, the anger, the helplessness. It all rushed back in a flood of emotions. But now there was something else, a sense of resolve. She couldn't let this break her. As the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into the hallway, making her way to her apartment door. The faint hum of city life could still be heard through the walls. But inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Naomi unlocked her door and entered her apartment, closing the door behind her and locking it again for good measure. The first thing she did was grab a glass of water, trying to calm her nerves. She sat down at the small kitchen table, staring at the empty space in front of her. The silence felt oppressive. She needed a plan, something to keep her mind focused and her emotions in check. Naomi reached for her laptop and opened it, the blue glow of the screen illuminating her face in the dimly lit apartment. She pulled up a blank document and began typing out everything she could remember about her encounter with Jason Turner. Every word he had said, every look he had given her. She needed a detailed account of everything, not just for herself, but for Marcus and Jonathan as well. If they were going to build a case, they would need all the facts. The words flowed easily as she typed, her mind replaying the events of the night with startling clarity. The arrogance in his voice, the way he had twirled her keys, the smug grin on his face as he drove away. It all came rushing back, fueling her anger. As she finished typing, Naomi leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. It was late, and exhaustion was starting to creep in. She saved the document and shut the laptop, deciding it was time to try and sleep, even if just for a few hours. She stood up, heading toward her bedroom, when her phone buzzed on the counter. Naomi froze. Her phone was in the car, the phone she had left behind when Jason had stolen it. Slowly, she turned back to the kitchen counter. The buzzing continued. A chill ran down her spine as she realized the phone wasn't hers. It was a burner phone Jonathan had given her months ago, in case she ever needed to contact him discreetly. She had completely forgotten about it until now. Naomi picked up the phone, staring at the unknown number on the screen. Her hands trembled slightly as she answered. "Hello," she said cautiously. There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a deep, gravelly voice. "Ms. Davis." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She didn't recognize the voice, but something about it felt unsettling. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "I've been following what happened tonight," the voice continued. "Turner crossed a line, and now things are in motion that he can't stop. But you need to be careful. You've stirred the hornet's nest, and they're going to come after you." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "Who is this? How do you know about what happened?" The voice paused again, as if considering the best way to respond. "I'm someone who's been watching Turner for a long time. You're not the first person he's hurt, but you might be the first who can bring him down. That makes you dangerous to him and to the people who protect him." Naomi's mind raced. She had no idea who this person was, but they clearly knew a lot about her situation. "What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything," the voice replied. "I'm offering you information. But be warned, Turner's not going to sit back and wait for you to make your move. He'll try to scare you, silence you. Don't let him." Naomi swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. "Why should I trust you?" "You don't have to," the voice said. "But I've seen what Turner's capable of, and I know you're not safe. Not yet." Before Naomi could respond, the line went dead. She stared at the phone, her mind reeling from the conversation. Who was this mysterious caller? How did they know so much, and why were they helping her? Naomi sat down at the kitchen table again, her thoughts racing. She had thought tonight's fight was with Jason Turner, but now it seemed like the battle was much bigger than she had realized. She wasn't just up against one corrupt cop. She was up against an entire system, and she had just been warned that they were coming for her. But Naomi wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Naomi sat in the quiet darkness of her apartment, staring at the burner phone in her hand. The voice on the other end had sent a chill through her, a reminder that she was walking into something much more dangerous than she had imagined. She had expected Jason Turner to retaliate, but now it seemed like she wasn't just facing him. There were others watching, others who knew more than she did. The words echoed in her mind. "You've stirred the hornet's nest." She placed the phone back on the table, her heart still racing. The clock on the wall read just past 2 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. Jonathan's voice of reassurance replayed in her head, reminding her that they had a plan, that Marcus King was on their side. But now doubt was creeping in. Who was this anonymous caller? Could she trust their warnings, or were they trying to scare her off? Naomi rose from the table, pacing the length of her apartment as she tried to gather her thoughts. She needed to think clearly. Panicking now wouldn't help her. She had to stay focused, stay grounded. But even as she told herself this, a part of her couldn't ignore the fact that she felt exposed, vulnerable. The faint buzz of her laptop drew her attention back to the kitchen counter. She had an idea. Maybe she could find out more about Jason Turner and the others behind him. If there was a network of corruption in the precinct, there had to be rumors, stories, or something she could dig up. It was risky, but Naomi had learned a thing or two about doing her own research when needed. She sat down, opened her laptop again, and quickly searched for news articles or reports involving Officer Jason Turner. For the first few minutes, nothing unusual came up, just the typical headlines about routine police activities. But then, buried deep in the search results, she found it. A mention of Turner's involvement in a controversial raid on a small business 2 years ago. The business owner had accused Turner of excessive force and theft during the raid, but the charges had mysteriously been dropped due to lack of evidence. Naomi clicked on the article, reading every word carefully. The story echoed what Marcus had said earlier, that Turner had been protected, and anyone who tried to stand up to him was silenced. The business owner, a man named James Whitaker, had lost nearly everything after the raid. His shop had been trashed, valuable merchandise had been seized, and his reputation had been ruined in the process. Whitaker had tried to sue the police department, but his case had been dismissed in court. Naomi frowned, anger boiling beneath the surface. This was exactly what Turner had done to her, abusing his power to intimidate and take what he wanted. But unlike Whitaker, she wasn't going to back down. With newfound determination, Naomi reached for her phone and texted Jonathan. "Naomi, look up a man named James Whitaker. He's one of Turner's victims. I think we should reach out to him." A few moments later, her phone buzzed with Jonathan's reply. "Jonathan, on it. I'll see what I can find. You okay?" Naomi hesitated before typing her response. "Naomi, I just got a weird call. Someone told me that Turner's people are watching me, and they warned me not to back down." There was a long pause before Jonathan replied. "Jonathan, do you know who it was?" Naomi, "No, they didn't say, but they knew about tonight. I'm not sure if they're trying to help or scare me." Jonathan, Be careful. Don't trust anyone until we know more. I'm going to start pulling every string I can to get to the bottom of this." Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her. Jonathan always had her back, and if anyone could navigate the legal and political mess they were stepping into, it was him. She closed her laptop, leaning back in her chair, trying to shake the lingering unease. She had expected a fight, but not like this. As the hours ticked by and the first rays of dawn began to creep through the blinds, Naomi knew she wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight. Her mind was too busy, replaying the events of the night, the warnings, the threats. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and she was ready to see it through. Later that morning, Naomi met up with Jonathan at his law office. The building was a small, modern space nestled among a row of legal firms, but it had always felt like a safe haven for Naomi. She had spent countless hours there as Jonathan worked late nights on cases, and it was where she had learned about justice, about fighting for what was right, no matter the odds. Jonathan greeted her at the door, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. He led her inside, closing the door behind them as they sat down in his office. "I made a few calls this morning," Jonathan began, handing Naomi a file. "James Whitaker is willing to talk. I spoke with his lawyer, and they're still bitter about what happened. He's been looking for someone to take up the fight again. He didn't have the resources back then, but with our help, this could be what we need to build a case." Naomi flipped through the file, skimming over the details. Whitaker's case mirrored her own: false accusations, abuse of power, and a legal system that had failed him. If they could prove a pattern of behavior from Turner, it would be harder for his superiors to protect him this time. "And what about the call I got last night?" Naomi asked, still unsettled by the anonymous warning. Jonathan frowned. "I've been thinking about that. It's possible someone inside the precinct is feeding you information. Someone who wants Turner and his people gone, but can't do it themselves. Or it could be a trap." Naomi nodded slowly. "I thought the same thing. But I can't ignore it. They knew too much." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. "You need to be careful, Naomi. We're playing a dangerous game here. The people protecting Turner aren't going to sit by and let us expose them. They'll fight back." Naomi met his gaze, her resolve solidifying. "I know, but we can't stop now. Turner took everything from me. I won't let him do it to anyone else." Jonathan sighed, nodding. "All right, I'm with you, but we need to be smart about this. No more late-night phone calls, no more running into danger without backup. We're going to do this by the book, build our case brick by brick. We'll gather evidence, we'll get witnesses, and we'll take Turner down the right way." Naomi smiled at her brother's determination. "Agreed. Let's take him down." As the day wore on, Naomi and Jonathan worked tirelessly, compiling information on Turner and his previous victims. Marcus had reached out with updates as well, confirming that he was pulling surveillance footage from the night of the theft and speaking with officers who might be willing to testify. The pieces were falling into place, slowly but surely. That evening, Naomi returned to her apartment, her mind clearer than it had been in days. She was still shaken by the events of the previous night, but the fear was slowly giving way to a sense of purpose. She was doing this for herself, for everyone Turner had wronged, and for the justice that had been long denied. As she sat down at her kitchen table, her phone buzzed again. It was Jonathan. "Jonathan. Got some news. Marcus is going to meet with Whitaker tomorrow. We're getting closer." Naomi smiled. Things were finally starting to move. But just as she was about to reply, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jonathan. It was another message from the unknown number. "Unknown number. They're watching you again. Be ready." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She stood up from the table, glancing out the window into the darkened street below. For a moment she felt like someone was there, lurking in the shadows, watching her. The calm she had felt earlier began to slip away, replaced by a familiar tension. She typed a quick reply. "Naomi, Who are you? The response came almost immediately. Unknown number. Someone who knows what's coming next. Naomi stared at the message, the words hanging in the air like a threat. She didn't know who this person was, but it was clear that the game had just gotten a lot more dangerous, and she was right in the middle of it. Naomi couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching her. After receiving the mysterious text, she had spent the better part of the evening checking her apartment windows, glancing nervously at the street below, and trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had no idea who was sending these messages, but the precision and timing made it clear. They were real, and they knew something. Her phone buzzed again, startling her. She quickly checked it, expecting another cryptic message from the unknown number, but instead it was Jonathan. Jonathan. Heading home. Marcus says Whitaker's interview went well. We're making progress. Naomi exhaled, relieved to hear something positive. They had been waiting for news from Marcus about his meeting with James Whitaker, hoping the former victim would provide the testimony they needed to build a case. But even with that small victory, Naomi couldn't shake the tension that gripped her. They were up against something much bigger than just one corrupt cop, and now she had an unnerving feeling that it was closing in on her. She typed a quick response. Naomi. Good to hear. I'll talk to you in the morning. Setting the phone down, Naomi paced her apartment. The silence felt heavier than before, like it was pressing in on her from all sides. She had lived alone for years, always finding comfort in the peace and quiet of her own space, but now the isolation felt suffocating. Every creak of the floor, every distant hum of the city outside, set her on edge. Maybe she was just being paranoid. After all, Jason Turner was still out there, and he was dangerous. But paranoia didn't feel like enough of an explanation. The anonymous texts, the warnings, they were too specific to be random fear. Someone was watching her, and they knew exactly what was at stake. A knock at the door shattered the silence. Naomi froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the late hour made the unexpected visitor all the more alarming. She slowly approached the door, peeking through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat. A man stood in the dim hallway, his figure shadowed by the flickering light overhead. He was tall, dressed in a dark hoodie, with his hands tucked into his pockets. His face was obscured by the low light, but Naomi could see him shifting, glancing around nervously. She stepped back from the door, her mind racing. Should she answer it? Should she call Jonathan? Every instinct told her to lock the door and stay quiet, but her curiosity, her need for answers, compelled her to do otherwise. Who is it? Naomi called out, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. There was a long pause before the man spoke. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, his voice low and calm. I'm here to help. Naomi's pulse quickened. Who are you? The man hesitated, shifting on his feet. You got the messages, didn't you? The warnings. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Whoever this man was, he was the one behind the text. She took another step back from the door, her hand gripping the edge of the kitchen counter for support. Why should I trust you? She asked, her voice firmer now. Because I'm the only one who knows what Turner's planning next, the man replied, his tone serious. If you want to stay ahead of him, you need to let me in. Naomi's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The stranger could be anyone, a trap set by Turner to scare her, or worse. But something about his voice, about the way he spoke, made her hesitate. There was no malice, no threat, just urgency. Against her better judgment, she unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see him more clearly. The man stepped into the light, revealing his face. He was in his early 30s with sharp features and piercing eyes that flickered with intensity. There was something familiar about him, though Naomi couldn't place it. Who are you? She asked again, her eyes narrowing. My name's Carter, he said, keeping his voice low. I used to work with Turner. I know how he operates and I know how dangerous he is. You've stirred something up, and now they're going to come after you. Naomi's grip on the door tightened. Why are you helping me? Carter glanced over his shoulder, as if making sure they were alone. Because I've seen what Turner's done to people like you, and I've seen what happens when no one stands up to him. I'm not going to let that happen again. Naomi studied him for a moment, searching his face for any hint of deception. He seemed genuine, but she couldn't ignore the risk. How do I know you're not working for him? How do I know this isn't a setup? Carter met her gaze, his expression serious. You don't, but if I were working for Turner, you'd already be in trouble. I wouldn't be standing here warning you. Naomi's mind raced. She had no reason to trust this man, but something told her that he was telling the truth. There was a quiet desperation in his voice, like he had seen too much, like he knew exactly how this would end if she didn't take his warning seriously. What does Turner want? Naomi asked, stepping aside slightly to allow Carter into the apartment. Carter entered cautiously, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting an ambush. Turner's network runs deep. The people protecting him, they're not just crooked cops. They've got ties to the criminal underworld. He's been running jobs on the side for years, taking payoffs, covering up crimes, and making sure certain people stay untouchable. And now that you're fighting back, he sees you as a threat. He's not going to let this slide. Naomi's blood ran cold. She had expected retaliation, but this was worse than she had imagined. What can I do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You need to be smart about this, Carter replied, his eyes meeting hers. Turner's going to try to discredit you, make it look like you're the one in the wrong. He'll use his connections, spread lies, and make you look like a criminal. You need to get ahead of him. Gather as much evidence as you can. Witnesses, recordings, anything that proves what he's done. Naomi nodded, feeling a surge of determination. We're already building a case. My brother's a lawyer, and we've got Detective Marcus King on our side. We're going after Turner. Carter's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Marcus. King's involved? He asked, his voice filled with surprise. Naomi nodded. Yes, he's been helping us collect evidence. Carter let out a slow breath, his expression tense. That's good. Marcus is one of the few people you can trust. But you need to move fast. Turner's not going to wait around for you to make your move. Naomi swallowed hard, her mind racing. What about you? She asked. Why did you leave Turner's side? Carter hesitated, his eyes darkening. I didn't leave. I was forced out. I saw too much, questioned too many things. Turner and his people made sure I couldn't stay in the precinct, but I still have contacts, people who owe me favors. I can help you, if you'll let me. Naomi studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. She didn't fully trust Carter, but right now he seemed like the only person who had a clear understanding of what they were up against. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it quickly. All right, Naomi said, her voice steady. I'll work with you, but if you cross me, you'll regret it. Carter nodded, his expression serious. I wouldn't expect anything less. As Naomi closed the door behind them, the weight of her decision settled on her shoulders. She was stepping deeper into the fight, and the risks were growing by the minute. But she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Carter might be a wild card, but she needed every advantage she could get. Turner wasn't just a corrupt cop anymore. He was the face of a system that had thrived on fear and intimidation for too long, and Naomi was ready to tear it down. Naomi couldn't sleep. Even after Carter had left her apartment, the weight of his words hung heavy in the air, leaving her mind restless and her body on edge. She had trusted few people in her life, and now here she was, caught in the middle of a tangled web of corruption and lies, wondering if she could trust a former insider like Carter. Yet there was something about him. His eyes had held a sincerity she hadn't expected, a weariness that told her he was as much a victim of Jason Turner's world as she was. Still, Naomi knew she couldn't take his warnings lightly. If Turner was coming for her, it meant the time she had to prepare was running out. The sound of her phone vibrating on the counter pulled her from her thoughts. It was Jonathan. She grabbed the phone quickly, her pulse quickening. John? Naomi, we need to meet, Jonathan said, his voice strained. Something's happened. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. What? What's going on? It's about Marcus, Jonathan replied. He's been taken off the case. They're shutting him down. Naomi's stomach dropped. What do you mean, shutting him down? They're saying he's compromised, Jonathan explained, his frustration clear. Apparently, someone's been feeding them information about our investigation. Marcus is under suspicion now. He's not allowed to work on it anymore. Naomi's grip tightened on the phone, her mind racing. Who would do that? Who would have tipped them off? I don't know, Jonathan said, his voice edged with worry. But this just confirms what we already knew. Turner's got people on the inside, and they're working fast to bury this. They're coming for all of us, Naomi. Naomi felt a surge of anger wash over her. We can't let them get away with this, John. We're too close. Marcus was one of the few people we could trust. I know, Jonathan replied. But this just means we need to move even faster. We need to find a way to protect Marcus and ourselves. And we need more evidence. Naomi sat down heavily at her kitchen table, her mind reeling. Everything was starting to unravel. The corruption went deeper than she had thought, and now they were losing allies. What do we do? She asked quietly. We stick to the plan, Jonathan said firmly. We meet tomorrow and go over everything we have. Carter's involvement changes things. Maybe we can use his knowledge to our advantage. Naomi nodded even though Jonathan couldn't see her. All right, tomorrow. Stay safe, Naomi, Jonathan said before the line went dead. Naomi set the phone down, her heart pounding in her chest. Marcus was out. They had to rely on their own strength now, and on Carter, whether they liked it or not. But even as her fear mounted, so did her resolve. Jason Turner had tried to break her once. He had tried to scare her into silence. Now he was doing the same to Marcus. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about justice. This was about ensuring that Turner could never do this to anyone else again. Naomi glanced out of her apartment window into the quiet streets below. The city looked deceptively peaceful, but she knew better. Somewhere out there, Turner was plotting his next move, and she had no intention of waiting around to see what it would be. The following morning, Naomi met Jonathan in his office, the weight of the previous night still hanging over them. Jonathan's face was tight with concern, but there was also a glimmer of determination in his eyes, a reminder that they were still in this fight together. I've been looking into Marcus's situation, Jonathan said as he sat down across from her, his voice low. Whoever is pulling the strings at the precinct is good. They've got half the department believing that Marcus is working for the wrong side. It's all fabricated, of course, but that doesn't matter if they can convince the higher-ups. Naomi shook her head in frustration. This is insane. They're framing him, and no one's even questioning it. Jonathan nodded grimly. Exactly. They want to make sure no one credible is left to help us. Without Marcus, we're vulnerable. But I did some digging. Carter's intel might be more valuable than we realized. He knows about a raid Turner ran a few months ago, one that didn't make it into the official reports. Naomi raised an eyebrow. A raid? What kind of raid? Illegal, Jonathan replied. He and a few other officers seized property from a warehouse without a warrant. Carter said they kept the goods off the books, funneled them through back channels. It's the kind of thing that could sink Turner if we can get the evidence. Naomi's pulse quickened. So, what's our next move? I think we need to bring Carter in, Jonathan said, meeting her eyes. If he can get us the proof, we'll have a shot at taking Turner down, even without Marcus. But we need to be careful. Carter's still an unknown variable. We don't know how far we can trust him. Naomi nodded, understanding the risks. Carter had helped them so far, but he was still a former ally of Turner's. There was no guarantee he wouldn't betray them when it mattered most. But they didn't have much of a choice. With Marcus out, they needed Carter more than ever. I'll set up a meeting with him, Naomi said. We need to move fast before Turner finds out we're on to him. Jonathan agreed, and they spent the next hour going over their strategy. The plan was simple. Carter would provide the information they needed to expose Turner's illegal activities, and in return, they would help Carter disappear. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only way forward. Later that evening, Naomi sat in a dimly lit cafe, waiting for Carter to arrive. Her heart raced with anticipation, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her. She had chosen this cafe because it was out of the way, a quiet place where they wouldn't be noticed. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her, that Turner's reach extended further than she could see. The door chimed as Carter walked in, scanning the room before spotting Naomi. He approached cautiously, his eyes flicking to the few other patrons before sitting down across from her. "Did you tell anyone you were meeting me?" Carter asked, his voice low. Naomi shook her head. "Number just my brother. No one else." Carter relaxed slightly, though his eyes still darted nervously around the room. "Good. We don't have much time. Turner's people are getting antsy. They know something's up." Naomi leaned in closer. "What do you have for us?" Carter glanced over his shoulder before pulling a small USB drive from his pocket, sliding it across the table to her. "Everything's on there. Records of the raid, communications between Turner and his team, even some footage from the warehouse cameras. It's enough to bury him if you use it right."